The message arrived on a Tuesday morning, and it changed everything. For 30 years, humanity had known they were being watched. Strange signals from deep space, unexplained objects near the outer planets, and shadows that moved across telescope images when they should not have moved. Scientists argued about what it all meant. Governments kept secrets. Ordinary people went about their lives, wondering if they were truly alone in the universe. They were not alone. They had never been alone. When humanity finally built their first faster-than-light engine, the Watchers revealed themselves. A transmission arrived at every major communication center on Earth at exactly the same moment. The message was simple. It was an invitation. The Galactic Council, a governing body of 12 ancient species, wished to welcome humanity into the larger community of intelligent life. Ambassador Una Park was chosen to lead humanity's delegation. She was 52 years old, a former diplomat who had spent her career handling the most difficult negotiations on Earth. She had a reputation for patience, for listening, and for never backing down when she believed she was right. The world's governments agreed that if anyone could represent humanity in this moment, it was her. She traveled to the meeting point aboard humanity's newest ship, accompanied by Admiral Tai-Ho Kim and Chief Scientist Jisoo Han. Tai-Ho was a quiet man who had served in the Navy for 30 years. He did not smile often, but when he did, it meant something. Jisoo was younger, brilliant, and excited about everything. She had spent her whole life dreaming of this moment. The Council Station orbited a neutron star in a system that had no name in any human language. It was enormous, larger than any structure humanity had ever built. Thousands of ships moved around it like insects around a hive. When the human vessel approached, the other ships pulled away, creating a clear path to the docking bay. Una watched through the window and felt very small. They were greeted by creatures of every shape and size. Some walked on two legs like humans. Others floated through the air or crawled along the walls. Translators hung around their necks, turning alien sounds into words they could understand. The words were polite, but the eyes that watched them were not friendly. They were curious. They were measuring. They were deciding what humanity was worth. The council chamber was a vast circular room, with seats arranged in tiers rising toward a distant ceiling. Representatives of the 12 elder races sat in the highest positions. Looking down at the central floor where visitors were expected to stand. Una stood there with Tai-Ho and Jisoo beside her, facing the most powerful beings in the galaxy. High Arbiter Velas's spoke first. He was an ancient creature with pale skin stretched thin over sharp bones, and his voice carried across the chamber like wind through dry leaves. He welcomed humanity on behalf of the Council. He praised their achievement in developing faster-than-light travel. He said that the galaxy was vast and full of wonders, and that humanity had earned the right to glimpse a small portion of it. Then he explained the terms. Humanity would be classified as a developing species. This was normal, he said, for young civilizations. It meant that humans would be protected and guided by more experienced races. It also meant that certain restrictions would apply. Humans would be forbidden from colonizing more than 2 star systems beyond their own. They would not be permitted to trade in advanced technology. They would not have a vote in council matters for at least 500 years. Most importantly, they would be placed under the oversight of the hegemony of Ralthik, one of the elder races, who would ensure that humanity developed properly. Velas's presented these terms as a gift. He spoke of the dangers that young species faced in the galaxy. He spoke of wars that had destroyed entire civilizations, of plagues that had wiped out worlds, of predators that hunted the weak. The Council, he said, offered protection from all of this. All humanity had to do was accept their place. Una listened without expression. She had studied the documents sent by the Council before the meeting. She had read between the lines. She understood exactly what was being offered. When Velasquez finished speaking, she asked a question. "These terms are not negotiable?" Velasquez smiled, or made a gesture that his species considered a smile. "The terms are traditional. Every young species has accepted them. In time, as humanity proves itself, restrictions may be relaxed." "In time," Una repeated. "How much time?" The Veth Consortium waited 3,000 years before receiving full rights. The banking clans of Orith waited 4,000. Patience is a virtue the Council values highly. Jisoo made a small sound beside her. Taiho's expression did not change, but his hands tightened into fists at his sides. Una looked up at the rows of alien faces watching her. Some seemed bored. Others seemed amused. A few seemed genuinely curious about what she would say. In the highest seats, the representatives of the hegemony of Ralthik sat perfectly still, their compound eyes reflecting the chamber lights like dark mirrors. She thought about Earth. She thought about her grandmother, who had grown up during a time when her country was occupied by a foreign power. She thought about history, about all the peoples who had signed treaties that promised protection but delivered only chains. She thought about the generations of humans who would live and die under someone else's rules, waiting for permission to be free. "And if we decline?" she asked. The chamber went silent. The translators hummed softly, converting her words into a dozen languages, but no one responded. It was as if she had said something that did not make sense, something that could not be translated. High Arbiter Velasquez leaned forward in his seat. "I do not understand the question. If we do not accept these terms," Una said clearly, "what happens then?" For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, slowly, a strange sound began to spread through the chamber. It took Una a moment to realize what it was. The delegates were laughing. No species had ever declined. The negotiations lasted 6 months. Every week, new experts arrived from Earth to join the delegation. Economists came with charts and projections. Historians came with examples from human history. Lawyers came with alternative proposals. Scientists came with ideas for cooperation that could benefit everyone. The Council rejected everything. It was not that they considered the proposals and found them lacking. They simply did not consider them at all. When human delegates presented counteroffers, the Council representatives nodded politely and then repeated the original terms as if nothing had been said. When humans pointed out unfair clauses, they were told that the clauses were traditional. When humans asked for compromise, they were reminded that the Council had 10,000 years of experience in these matters, and humanity had none. Una began to understand something important. The Council was not negotiating. They were waiting. They believed that humans would eventually realize they had no choice and accept whatever was offered. Time meant nothing to species that lived for thousands of years. They could wait forever. The representative of the hegemony of Ralthik was named Kethis. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with a body covered in hard black shell and eyes that never seemed to blink. He spoke rarely during the formal sessions, but when he did, his words cut deep. He seemed to take personal pleasure in reminding humanity of their insignificance. During one session, a human economist named Do Yoon tried to explain why the two-system limit would cripple humanity's development. He showed population projections, resource calculations, and growth models. He spoke for nearly an hour, laying out a careful argument for why humans needed more room to expand. When he finished, Kethis made a clicking sound with his mandibles. The translator converted it to laughter. "Your species," Kethis said, "was burning rocks for heat when mine was building the first starships. You have been traveling between stars for less than 50 years. We have been doing so for 60,000. Do you truly believe you understand the economics of galactic civilization better than we do?" Daohyun stood very still. His face had gone red, but he kept his voice calm. "I believe I understand what my people need to survive." "What your people need," Cadet replied, "is guidance. What you want is irrelevant. You are children arguing with adults about bedtime. Be grateful we are patient." The session ended shortly after. That night, Yuna found Do-Yun sitting alone in the human quarters, staring at the wall. She sat beside him and said nothing for a long time. "They are never going to change the terms," Do-Yun said finally. "Are they?" "No," Yuna agreed. "They are not. So, what do we do?" Yuna did not answer immediately. She was thinking about something her grandmother had told her long ago. A story about resistance, about dignity, about the moment saying no became more important than anything else. The final session came 3 weeks later. The council chamber was full. Word had spread that the humans would finally give their answer, and delegates from across the galaxy had come to watch the young species submit. It was entertainment for them, nothing more. High Arbiter Velasquez called the session to order. He asked, formally, whether humanity was prepared to accept the terms of membership in the Galactic Council. Yuna stood at the center of the chamber. Behind her stood Taiho, Jisoo, Do-Yun, and every other human on the station. They had discussed this moment for weeks. They had voted. The decision was unanimous. Before she could speak, Cadet interrupted. He rose from his seat, his dark shell gleaming under the chamber lights, and addressed the assembly. "Let me make something clear to our young friends," he said. "If you do not accept these terms, you will receive no terms at all. You will be cut off from galactic trade. No species will buy from you or sell to you. No technology will reach your worlds. You will be alone, struggling in the dark while the rest of us move forward. This is not a threat. It is simply the truth. You are barely a century removed from burning fossil fuels. You should be grateful that we are willing to consider you at all." He sat back down, satisfied. The chamber was silent. Every eye turned to Yuna. She looked at Cadet for a long moment. Then she looked at Velasquez, at the other representatives of the elder races, at the thousands of delegates who had come to watch humanity bow. "We came here seeking partnership," she said. Her voice was calm and clear, and it carried to every corner of the vast chamber. "We came offering cooperation, trade, and friendship. We asked for nothing except to be treated as equals." She paused. "You offered us chains dressed as protection. You offered us cages disguised as guidance. You looked at our species and saw something to be controlled, not something to be respected." Velasquez raised a thin hand. "Ambassador, I must warn you. I am not finished," Yuna said. The chamber went completely still. No one interrupted a speaker to address the High Arbiter. It simply was not done. Yuna continued. "Earth is a long history. It is full of moments when powerful nations offered weaker ones protection that became slavery, guidance that became domination, partnership that became subjugation. We have learned from that history. We will not repeat it." She turned to face her delegation. Taiho met her eyes and nodded once. Jisoo was pale but determined. Every human in the chamber rose to their feet. Yuna faced the council one final time. "We decline your terms. We withdraw from negotiations. Humanity will find its own path among the stars, or we will die trying. But we will not kneel." She turned and walked toward the exit. Her delegation followed in perfect silence. Their footsteps echoed through the chamber like a drumbeat. "You cannot survive alone," Velasquez called after them, his ancient voice rising to something like panic. "You will return within a decade, begging for our help." Yuna did not stop. She did not look back. The great doors of the council chamber closed behind the humans. The sound echoed through the station like the end of something old and the beginning of something new. Docked in the chamber, the assembled delegates sat in stunned silence. This had never happened before. In 10,000 years, no species had ever walked away. Cadet was the first to speak. "They will be back," he said. "Give them a year. They will come crawling back, desperate for scraps. And when they do, we will teach them the true meaning of humility." The other delegates nodded and murmured their agreement. Of course, the humans would return. What else could they possibly do? They were wrong. 1 year passed, and the humans did not return. The Galactic Council waited with supreme confidence. They had seen this before, or so they believed. Young species sometimes needed time to accept their place in the natural order. The humans would struggle alone for a while, realize their mistake, and come back humbled. It was only a matter of time, but the months became years, and the years became decades. 5 years after the walkout, Council observers noticed something strange. Human ships had vanished from all known trade routes. Their colony worlds, which had been growing steadily before first contact, went dark on long-range sensors. The Sol system itself, humanity's home, became impossible to observe. Some kind of interference field surrounded it, blocking every attempt to scan what lay within. 10 years after the walkout, the hegemony of Ralthik sent a diplomatic vessel to human space. It was meant to deliver a message offering humanity a second chance to negotiate, with slightly improved terms. The ship crossed into the region where human colonies had once been, and was never heard from again. Cadet demanded an explanation. He accused humanity of destroying the ship, of committing an act of war. He spoke of revenge and punishment. But in truth, no one knew what had happened. The ship had simply vanished, as if swallowed by darkness. 15 years after the walkout, rumors began to spread. Traders who ventured near the borders of human space reported strange things. They spoke of massive energy readings, the kind usually associated with weapons capable of destroying stars. They spoke of gravitational anomalies, as if someone was bending space itself. They spoke of ships moving at speeds that should have been impossible, appearing and disappearing like ghosts. A merchant named Gorn brought back a recording. He had been traveling through an unclaimed system near the human border when his sensors detected movement. He activated his cameras just in time to capture a human vessel passing through the system at incredible speed. The ship was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. It was sleek, elegant, and surrounded by an energy field that distorted the light around it. It paid no attention to Goran's tiny freighter. It simply passed through and vanished into the darkness beyond when Goran showed the recording to others. Some laughed and called it fake. But others looked more carefully at the technology on display and went very quiet. 20 years after the walkout, the Council sent a fleet. It was not meant to start a war. The Council was not entirely foolish. They sent 30 ships, a modest force, just enough to demonstrate strength and demand answers. The fleet crossed into human territory and headed toward the coordinates where human colonies had once existed. 3 days later, the fleet returned. Every ship was intact. Not a single weapon had been fired. But something had happened to them. Their navigation systems had been completely wiped. Their sensor logs showed nothing but static. Their weapon systems had been remotely disabled without anyone understanding how. The crews reported no contact with any human vessels. They had simply found themselves suddenly back at the border, pointed toward home. With no memory of how they got there. And in their computer systems, they found a message. Admiral Minji Kang had recorded it personally. She was a woman in her 40s, with short gray hair and eyes that seemed to look directly through the screen. She stood on the bridge of a ship that made the Council's most advanced vessels look like toys. "This is Admiral Minji Kang of the United Earth Defense Command," she said. "You have entered human space without permission. Your ships have been returned to you, unharmed as a gesture of good faith. This is your only warning. Respect our boundaries. We have no interest in your council, your trade, or your politics. Leave us alone, and we will leave you alone. Cross our borders again, and you will not be returned." The message ended. The screen went dark in the council chamber. The recording played on every screen. The delegates watched in silence. For 10,000 years, they had been the most powerful force in the known galaxy. They had decided which species rose and which fell. They had controlled trade, technology, and the flow of history itself. Now they faced something they did not understand. High Arbiter Velas's called for calm. He reminded the council that humanity was still young, still small, still limited in numbers and resources. Whatever tricks they had learned in their isolation, they could not possibly threaten the combined might of the elder races. But even as he spoke, doubt crept into his voice, because somewhere beyond the walls of the chamber, beyond the borders they had drawn and the rules they had made, humanity was building something. And no one in the galaxy had any idea what it was. Cadet sat in his seat and said nothing. His dark eyes stared at the empty space where the human message had played, and for the first time in his long life, the Ralthi commander felt something he had never experienced before. He felt afraid. 30 years after the walkout, the silence continued. The humans did not return. They did not attack. They did not threaten. They simply existed out there in the darkness, doing whatever they were doing, building whatever they were building, and the galaxy waited. Some species began to ask questions. Why had the council treated the humans so harshly? What was so wrong with offering them fair terms? What if, instead of making enemies, they had made friends? These questions were not spoken loudly. Not yet, but they were spoken. And slowly, quietly, the foundation of the old order began to crack. The council had made a mistake. They had underestimated humanity. They had assumed that the young species would break under pressure, would accept their place, would behave like every other civilization before them. They had been wrong. And now, hidden in the silence and the darkness, humanity was about to prove just how wrong they had been. 35 years after humanity walked away, the cracks became impossible to ignore. It started with fuel. The hegemony of Ralthi had controlled the synthetic fuel trade for thousands of years. Every ship in the galaxy ran on fuel that the hegemony produced, and they charged whatever price they wanted. Species that displeased them found their fuel supplies cut off. Worlds that resisted their influence found themselves stranded in the darkness between stars. It was power, real power, and the hegemony had held it for so long that they had forgotten what competition felt like. Then a new fuel appeared on the black market. No one knew where it came from. It was cleaner than hegemony fuel, more efficient, and far cheaper. Merchants began to use it in secret, then openly. When the hegemony tried to trace its source, they found nothing. The supply lines seemed to appear from nowhere and vanish just as quickly. Within 3 years, the hegemony's fuel monopoly was broken. Their economy, built on the assumption that they would always control this vital resource, began to crumble. Cadet raged in the council chamber. He accused other species of conspiracy, of working with humanity, of plotting against the natural order. But his accusations fell on deaf ears. The other elder races were watching the hegemony fall, and some of them were quietly pleased. The Ralthi had been arrogant for too long. Perhaps it was time for a change. Then came the medical breakthroughs. The VEF Consortium had controlled advanced medicine for millennia. They held the cures for 1,000 diseases and sold them at prices that kept entire planets in debt for generations. It was cruel, but it was profitable, and the consortium had grown fat and lazy on the suffering of others. Then the cures began to appear for free. Anonymous shipments arrived at hospitals across the galaxy. They contained treatments for diseases that the consortium had claimed were incurable. They contained medicines that the consortium had priced beyond reach. They contained instructions written in simple language, explaining exactly how to manufacture more. No one claimed responsibility. But the packages all bore the same marking, a small symbol that some researchers recognized from old human broadcasts. It was Earth's sun, simplified into a circle with rays extending outward. The consortium sent investigators to find the source. None of them returned with answers. Some of them did not return at all. 40 years after the walkout. The banking clans of Orith faced their own crisis. The clans had controlled galactic finance since before most species had achieved spaceflight. They decided which civilizations received loans and which were denied. They set interest rates that kept borrowers trapped forever. They foreclosed on entire planets when debts went unpaid. Then someone began paying off those debts. It happened slowly at first. A small colony world that had owed the clans for centuries suddenly announced that their debt had been cleared. Then another. Then a dozen more. The money came from accounts that the clans could not trace, through channels that they could not follow. By the time they understood what was happening, hundreds of worlds had been freed from their financial chains. The clans demanded action from the council. They wanted fleets sent to human space, a full military response, punishment for this interference in galactic affairs. But the council hesitated. They remembered what had happened to the last fleet that had crossed into human territory. Meanwhile, on the fringes of the galaxy, something else was happening. Species that had always been marginalized began to whisper about new friends. They spoke of traders who offered fair prices, of teachers who shared knowledge freely, of helpers who asked for nothing in return. They spoke of humans who came in small ships, stayed for short visits, and left behind gifts that changed everything. A species of aquatic beings on the outer rim received technology that let them travel to other ocean worlds. A race of gentle giants who had been enslaved for labor received weapons to defend themselves. A dying civilization that the council had ignored for centuries received a cure. They needed to survive. None of these species had anything to offer in return. They were too small, too poor, too weak to matter in galactic politics. But the humans helped them anyway. When council investigators asked these species about their human benefactors, they received the same answer again and again. The humans had asked for only one thing in return for their help. They had asked to be remembered. 40-5 years after the walkout, High Arbiter Velisis called an emergency session of the council. He was old now, ancient even by his species standards, and his voice trembled as he addressed the assembly. "We are facing a crisis," he said. "Our economy is fractured. Our monopolies are broken. Our influence is fading. Species that once feared us now laugh at our demands. And we still have no idea what humanity is actually doing out there in the darkness." He looked around the chamber. Half the seats that had once been filled were now empty. The Hegemony's delegation had shrunk to a handful of representatives. The consortium had stopped sending anyone at all. The banking clans were too busy trying to save themselves to attend meetings. "We must find out what they are doing," Velisis continued. "We must bring them back under control before it is too late." But the younger delegates, the ones who represented species that had never held power in the old order, exchanged knowing looks. Control? The humans had not been under anyone's control for almost 50 years. They had built something out there in the darkness. Something that the council could not understand and could not stop. And from the look of things, the humans were just getting started. A delegate from a small species near the human border stood up. "Perhaps," she said carefully, "instead of trying to control them, we should try to understand them. Perhaps we should ask ourselves why so many species are turning to humanity for help instead of to us." The chamber fell silent. It was the first time anyone had dared to suggest such a thing. Velisis stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he sat back down. He had no answer. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Galactic Council had no answer. And somewhere in the darkness beyond their reach, humanity continued to build. 50 years after humanity walked away, a single ship appeared at the Council station. It was not a warship. It carried no visible weapons. It was elegant and simple, painted white with a blue circle on its hull. When it requested permission to dock, the station controllers did not know what to do. They had never expected this moment to actually come. The ship carried 2 passengers. Ambassador Una Park was 82 years old now. Her hair was completely white, and she walked with a slight limp from an old injury. But her eyes were the same as they had always been, sharp and calm and full of quiet strength. She had spent 50 years helping to build something new, and now she had returned to show the galaxy what humanity had become. Beside her walked Jun-Ho Lee. He was 30 years old, born after the walkout, raised in a civilization that had never known the Council's shadow. He represented the second generation of humanity's independence, the children who had grown up free. They walked through the station corridors together. The species they passed stared at them with a mixture of fear, curiosity, and something that might have been hope. Rumors had spread across the galaxy about what humanity had been doing for the past 5 decades. Now, finally, they would learn the truth. The council chamber was half empty. The great tiers of seats that had once held thousands of delegates now held only hundreds. The hegemony of Rolthik had collapsed entirely. The remaining members scattered across the galaxy as refugees. The Veth Consortium had dissolved. The banking clans had declared bankruptcy and disappeared. Of the 12 air races that had once ruled the galaxy, only 4 still held their seats, but the empty seats had not stayed empty. In their place sat representatives of dozens of smaller species. Civilizations that had never been allowed to speak in the council chamber now occupied positions of prominence. Species that had been ignored for millennia now had voices. The galaxy had changed, and the change was visible in every face that watched the human delegation enter. High Arbiter Velisis was not there. He had died 3 years earlier, still waiting for humanity to return begging for forgiveness. His seat was empty, a symbol of an era that had ended. Una walked to the center of the chamber, the same place where she had stood 50 years ago. Jun-Ho stood beside her, his expression calm. Around them, the galaxy held its breath. She looked at the assembled faces. She saw fear in some, hostility in others. But in many, she saw something else. She saw hope. She saw curiosity. She saw a species that had been waiting their whole lives for someone to offer them a different path. 50 years ago, Una began, her voice carrying across the chamber. I stood in this place and asked a simple question. I asked what would happen if humanity declined your terms. You laughed at me. You told us we could not survive alone. You told us we would come crawling back within a decade. She paused. We did not come back. The chamber was completely silent. In your absence, we built something different. Not an empire, not a kingdom, not a hierarchy of masters and servants. We built a network of equals. We reached out to every species that the council had ignored, every civilization that had been left behind, every world that had been told they were not important enough to matter. We offered them partnership. Real partnership. Not chains disguised as protection, but genuine cooperation between peoples who respected each other. She looked at the remaining elder races, the ones who still clung to their high seats as if position could protect them from change. You called us children. You said we did not understand how the galaxy worked. Perhaps you were right. We did not understand how your galaxy worked. So we built our own. Jun-Ho stepped forward. His voice was younger, stronger, but it carried the same calm confidence. The human cooperative now includes 347 species, he said. Together, we control more than half of the known galaxy. Our members range from ancient civilizations to species that achieved spaceflight only last year. We have no restrictions on development, no limits on expansion, no oversight by those who consider themselves superior. Every member has an equal voice. Every member has an equal vote. He looked directly at the seat where Kethis had once sat. It was empty now. The Ralfie commander had died in poverty on a backwater world, still cursing humanity with his last breath. We did not come here to rejoin the Galactic Council, Junho continued. That organization is dying. Everyone in this chamber knows it. The old order is finished. He paused, letting the words settle. We came to invite you to join us. The silence stretched for a long moment. Then, slowly, movement began in the chamber. A representative from a small aquatic species stood up. They had been one of the first to receive help from humanity, decades ago, when no one else had cared if they lived or died. Without a word, they walked down from their seat and crossed the chamber floor to stand beside the human delegation. Another species followed. Then another. Then a dozen more. The marginalized, the forgotten, the ones who had suffered under the old order for thousands of years. They rose from their seats and moved to humanity's side. Within an hour, more than half the chamber had crossed over. The remaining elder species sat frozen in their high seats, watching their galaxy reshape itself around them. They had ruled for 10,000 years. They had believed they would rule forever. Now they watched as the species they had dismissed and controlled walked away from them, one by one, to stand with humanity. Yuna watched them go with quiet satisfaction. 50 years ago, she had walked out of this chamber with nothing but her dignity and her belief that humanity could do better. Now she stood surrounded by hundreds of species who had chosen to build something new together. She turned to address the whole chamber one final time. Humanity remembers what it feels like to be underestimated. We remember what it feels like to be dismissed, to be controlled, to be told that we do not matter. We will never do that to others. Every species that joins us will be treated as an equal. Every voice will be heard. Every people will be free to grow and change and become whatever they choose to become. She extended her hand toward the remaining delegates. Even those who had not moved, even those who still clung to the remnants of the old order. The galaxy is changing whether you accept it or not. You can be part of what comes next, or you can be left behind. The choice is yours. Junho smiled beside her. Now, he said, shall we talk? In the highest seats, the last of the elder races looked at each other. They saw the truth written in the faces of the hundreds who had already chosen humanity. They saw their own irrelevance staring back at them. And slowly, reluctantly, one by one, they rose from their ancient thrones and walked down to join the new order. The Galactic Council, as it had existed for 10,000 years, was finished. Something better had taken its place, and at the center of it all stood humanity. The species that had been laughed at, dismissed, and underestimated. The species that had walked away from an insult and returned with an empire of equals. The species that had proven, once and for all, that the universe belonged to those who refused to kneel. Unipark looked around the chamber at the new galaxy they had built. And she smiled. They had done it. Humanity had won.